Welcome to Eviliv, the live media commentary of the show that answers the question, does the American dream exist? Subscribe if you're new to the channel because today we are reviewing Hunter S. Thompson's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a savage journey to the heart of the American dream. Now, like many of you... That's an interesting, stretchy looking... Okay. Like many of you, my first exposure to this was from the film starring Johnny Depp and I think it was Benicio del Toro as Hunter S. Thompson and his lawyer, respectively. And it was a brilliant film. And of course, it came out, at least I saw it in a time where I also engaged in copious amounts of said illicit stuffs, products, pills, drugs, acid, stuff like that. And I still am a huge fan of psychedelics. I think they genuinely help human beings. So, all that being said, I loved this film when I saw it as a young man. Of course, everything that's shown in the film is sort of a hyper-reality version of what the experience is being on said substances. Or perhaps just in those doses that they're taking them, because I've never taken those sort of insane doses with back-to-back different types of drugs that they have. But the core point of this was not to exploit drug culture as much as it was to showcase Hunter S. Thompson's method of writing, which was groundbreaking. I mean, he pretty much just created gonzo journalism. There's actually a quote he had about this that I should have copied and brought forth, but I didn't. And he was saying that as far as gonzo journalism is concerned, he said it is based on William Faulkner's idea of the best fiction is far more true than any kind of journalism. And the best journalists have always known this. And I think that's an interesting way of presenting the idea, because the best fiction is far more true than journalism tells you that journalism applies opinion and it doesn't present facts. Or journalism presents events and facts and doesn't provide experience. And there's something to be said about a human experience in a given moment, because it's how you interpret things. It's going to be wildly different, completely different. And really in this, what ultimately is like a novella, really. It's very, very short. You can finish it in a day if you want. What you really find is, rather than focusing on the actual journalism stories he was sent to Vegas to watch, he shared his experience of delivering on those, or in the case of the novella, actually not delivering on those stories, and instead just hyper-focusing on what it is like to sort of go on this rampant craze of drugs and experience. And that it's true. Like, that's what's really fascinating about this, is that the setup is that Hunter S. Thompson and his lawyer, of course he's doing it through characters, are going to Vegas to cover a motorcycle race initially. And then they just sort of go wild with drugs and experiences and stuff. And that's really what the first half of the book is about. The second half is about him going back to cover a drug convention for a police, like it's basically like a police, I'm going to get this wrong. Los Angeles County Sheriff Department. No, where was it? I want to get it right for you guys. Basically just a police drug conference. And then, of course, the insanity that ensues there. A lot of the shenanigans are set off by both the journalist and the lawyer at different times. Their interaction with each other is one of genuine camaraderie, but they also tend to go to blows when they've imbibed too many illicit drugs. And that's just the reality of people who have a healthy drug addiction together. You will inevitably get along and come to head. So he coined gonzo journalism based on that Faulkner reference. And of course, this is illustrated by Ralph Steadman, which I personally think is brilliant. I love illustrations like this. I mean, I'm an artist, and so it's just sort of my bread and butter, but not a lot of people enjoyed it. They thought it was too abstract, and it didn't really focus on the core of the story. It's just really like an opening scene of getting to Las Vegas in the car, which of course is one of the greatest scenes in the book. Now, my biggest complaint about this book is that, much like the movie, in fact, the first half feels completely divergent from the second because they are two different articles submitted to Rolling Stone, which were then later put into a book, this novella. And so they feel cohesive in that the characters are the same and the setting's the same and the drug shenanigans are the same. But the drive, like the momentum, comes to a screeching halt in the end of the first story, and then it never really picks back up in the second. And so you're sort of meandering around, and it's interesting because this is really supposed to be about two individuals and their experiences, but there's many times where Hunter S. Thompson, as the author, delves into like tertiary characters and shares their experiences in the sort of editorial format, and then jumps back to the full time of what's happening. And while I enjoy characters in novels, I know this just sounds really weird and flippant, I enjoy showcasing new characters. No one's picking it up for those characters. They're picking it up for Hunter S. Thompson's shenanigans. That's why they pick it up. So I thought those divergences were superfluous, completely pointless. All right, so this is based on two trips to Las Vegas, Nevada that Hunter S. Thompson took with attorney and Chicano activist Oscar Zeta Acosta in March and April of 1971. The first trip resulted from an expose Thompson was writing for Rolling Stone magazine about the Mexican-American television journalist Ruben Salazar, who officers of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had shot and killed with tear gas grenade fired at close range during the National Chicago Moratorium March against the Vietnam War in 1970. Thompson was using Acosta, a prominent Mexican-American political activist and attorney, as a central source for the story, and the two found it difficult for a brown-skinned Mexican to talk openly with a white reporter in the racially tense atmosphere of Los Angeles, California. The two needed a more comfortable place to discuss the story and decided to take advantage of an offer from Sports Illustrated to write photograph captions for the annual Mint 400 desert race being held in Las Vegas on March 21 to 23 of 1971. Now, it has taken me way too long to read this novel. I don't know why I waited until now. I'm glad I read it, even though I was a little bit disappointed. I mean, the thing is because it's two short stories written for Rolling Stone magazine articles and then put together in a short novella, it's not a very robust read. And so it's very easy for them to adapt into a screenplay because it's almost beat by beat exact because it's so short. Same thing with Rosemary's Baby and Roman Polanski. It's so short and concise that they just sort of followed it perfectly. I mean, in Rosemary's Baby's part, it was just Roman Polanski not knowing that he was allowed to change or deviate because he was so new to directing. But in any case, I don't know. I was expecting more, I guess, is my point. And so rather than judging it on my expectations going in, and instead on the merits of what it is and what it was always meant to be, I have to see it in a different light. I have to force myself to appreciate it in a different way. Because again, my expectations are bound up with the film and with my own personal journeys my own shenanigans that I was experiencing at the time. And this was way back in the 90s. So it's a different beast for me than it probably would have been if I read it first and then saw it later. So he had first submitted a 2,500 word manuscript to Sports Illustrated that was aggressively rejected. And then weeks later, Thompson and Acosta returned to Vegas to report for Rolling Stone on the National District Attorneys Association's conference on narcotics and dangerous drugs being held from April 25th to 29th, 1971, and to add material to the larger Fear and Loathing narrative. The novel first appeared as a 2-part series in Rolling Stone magazine in 1971 before being published into the book form in 1972. Of course, it was later adapted into the film of the same title in 1998 by director Terry Gilliam, starring Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro, who portrayed Raoul Duke and Dr. Gonzo, respectively. So, of course, Hunter S. Thompson was Dr. Gonzo and Raoul Duke was his lawyer. The two events being the cover to cover the Mint 400, which is a motorcycle race, and then the police drug conference. This story is brilliant when it is describing how they feel, think, and interact when on drugs. It's brilliant. It's hilarious. I found myself laughing out loud in some parts. I mean, I just absolutely loved it. And of course, after having seen the film, then of course I'm imagining those actors in those roles. And I thought it was a very, very fun read. Again, the experience are a little hyper sensationalized because I've never done that intense amount and mixing that many different types. And so I've never experienced anything quite like what they describe in this, but I believe that they probably did experience it as he explains, because Hunter S. Thompson was a massive alcoholic and drug addict. I mean, massive. And gun addict, if we're going to just put it all on the table. He was insane. He ended up taking his own life. But he's a brilliant writer. And this whole gonzo journalism frame of telling events but through your own personal experience it changed journalism forever. And so you can never discount the impact that Hunter S. Thompson had on American writing, American literature, American journalism, and ultimately the film, sort of the film industry, through them trying to sort of bring his works to life to varying successes and stuff. Aggressively Rejected describes dating life in the 90s. Would you like to go out with me, Susan? We'll take that as a maybe. So my favorite parts of this are, of course, that opening scene in the desert where he starts seeing bats and they pick up the hitchhiker and then they go to check in at the hotel and it's just insanity. But there's also really amazing scenes of them going to like circus when they're completely out of their minds and just the experiences that they have and how his lawyer is constantly going on this wild, aggressive tint of a ride. In every case, they get to a point where they pick up this, the lawyer picks up this kind of like a runaway artist girl that's played by Christina Ricci in the film. But I thought that was hilarious because they're like, you just crossed from like just being an insane drug addict to being a kidnapper and rapist. Like, there's no getting out of this. If we're caught, we're dead. We need to get out of here. But it just shares that mindset when you go into new places, or I distinctly remember this. It was a very, very, it's just apropos to how you feel when you're on these drugs. It was me and a bunch of friends all around in Ray's house is his name. And it was sort of the drug den that we all sort of hung out in. We're all talking, listening to music, just sort of having a good time, completely out of our minds. And then all of a sudden the door is knocked on and everyone, it's almost like a record scratch, just like stares at the door. No one gets up because we're all out of our minds, just staring at the door like, who could this interloper be? Well, we have to destroy this interloper. Should we open the door and find out or pretend that we're not here? Did they hear us talking before they knocked on the door? So do they know we're here? How long will they knock on the door? And will the insanity of the sound of the knock be so much that it compels us to open it lest we go insane? Like, these are the kinds of thoughts that are like rattling around as we're like trying to whisper, but clearly incapable of whispering, being very loud. So the person on the other side of the door heard everything, but we were trying to decide whether or not we should even address the door being knocked at once because that's the outside world and we're tightly contained in this insanity here. And you get that with this book. And it's so amazing when you do it because I would imagine if you've never experienced it, it would probably just be an entertaining ride. But if you have experienced it, then you're literally going on the same ride with him at the same exact moment, being able to understand exactly what is running through their minds. And it's brilliant. It's amazing. I loved it. The whole ride was so great. Again, it was a little slow in the back end. And the Gary Busey scene where he's the cop that pulls over Hunter S. Thompson, it didn't end with the kiss. And I thought that was a really important part of just insanity in the film that it was direly missing. And I don't know if they added it just because it seems like it should be there or what. Maybe it was just Gary Busey ad-libbing. I don't know. But I loved it in the movie, and I was waiting for it in the book, and it never happened. So you can't get them all. Least favorite is the pacing. The pacing is really rough. And I think it has everything to do with the style of gonzo journalism. I mean, the reality is not everything is going to be firing in all cylinders at all times. Your experience is going to wax and wane depending on what you're experiencing. Duh. And that drags down the flow of the book. And again, it wasn't intended to be a book, and so I can't really judge it on that idea. But if you're going to then collect the two articles into a book, into a novella, then maybe take a look at it and see how the pacing feels with those two disparate stories put together back to back, and then maybe work it a little bit so that it does feel like it has a nice ebb and flow of narrative and editorial and insane experience. Ultimately, I love this book. I think it is brilliant, and I think everyone should read it. If you've ever done any form of drugs, you should definitely read it. And if you're ever wondering what it's like to be on drugs, you should definitely read it. But for the fact that this is a seminal piece of American literature, everyone should read it. And that's why I gave it a 4 out of 5 evil eyes. Again, it's just the pacing. That's the only reason. It's uneven, and it's a little bit frustrating. But damn, this is a good novella. I mean, I can't really call it a novel because it's really short. It's a good read. Do yourselves a favor and check it out. And if you're, weird like me, then you're definitely going to identify with some parts in this book, and you're going to have a great time reminiscing and then laughing your ass off at the craziness that ensues. So do yourselves a favor, check it out. Thank you guys so much for checking in with this review of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, a savage journey into the heart of the American dream by Hunter S. Thompson. As always, remember that evil, spelled backwards, is live. So get out there, read the book, and be evil.